Good evening. On behalf of the Friends of the Chinese American Museum, the board, and also the staff members of the Chinese American Museum, we'd like to welcome you to tonight's commemorative event. While it's not a happy occasion, I am delighted to see the faces that are out there in our audience in person. And I would also like to welcome those of you who are live streaming and watching us virtually. This is the 10th anniversary of when the Chinese American Museum started our commemorative events for the Chinese Massacre. Looking out today, I see many new faces, and these are the new friends that we've made as we plan for this year's 150th commemorative event. But there are others who have been with us every year, and you're here with us once again this year. In the past, our commemorative events have been basically a family affair, a commemorative family affair. The Chinese American communities, our families, our leaders would come and join us as we pay our respects and weep over the horrible event that happened on October 24th. But this year is very different because now our village has grown. We have worked now for the last few months especially with new friends, new people, new awareness. And much of that could be credited to the city, to the leadership of Mayor Garcetti, to the continuous leadership of our state and our national leaders. And so as I look out, I am just overwhelmed at who I'm seeing in the audience. And for that, I thank you all for making this important enough to participate and to take the time tonight to join us. So thank you very much. One of the people who came every year to commemorate our event is Congresswoman Judy Chu. She would fly back, even if it's inconvenient, and she's in Washington, D.C., she would fly back to make sure that she would commemorate with us. And as the years went by, her telling of the events became so personal and so moving. And so tonight, I would like to invite the Congresswoman up and actually tell us about the event itself so that will set the tone for what we do for the rest of the evening. Congresswoman?
Today, we commemorate the 150th anniversary of one of the most horrific but least understood massacres in our country's history. I have attended all of the commemorations, but I want to thank the Chinese American Museum for initiating this commemoration 10 years ago, when there were just a handful of us standing around that plaque over there. Today, this terrible tragedy is finally getting the attention it needs. With a week full of events, with articles in the LA Times, and a movement thankfully blessed by our mayor, Eric Garcetti, toward a monument. It is my hope that with your persistence, our nation will finally recognize the tragedy of the 1871 Los Angeles Chinese Massacre, which is what we believe to be the largest mass lynching in our nation's history. It sends chills up my spine to think that all this happened 150 years ago and started only a few feet from here around the block. It started as an argument between two Chinese tongs about a Chinese woman. A white man who tried to intervene was accidentally killed. Because of that, a mob of 500 people rushed into the streets filled with hate. Using the fight as an excuse, they hunted down and shot any Chinese who tried to leave their home or business. And it didn't matter that they had nothing to do with the fight that started it. Chinese buildings were looted and riddled with bullets. Men, women, and children were dragged out of their homes, trampled by the mob, beaten and hung by their necks. A highly respected doctor, Dr. Jean Tong, begged in both English and Spanish for his life, offering money and the diamond ring on his finger. But he was given no mercy. The mob stole his money and shot him in the mouth and then chopped off his finger to steal his ring before they hanged him from a noose. They grabbed a frightened young boy, only 12 years old, who'd been in the country for only a month and didn't know a word of English. He was hanged. In the end, 19 Chinese Americans were tortured and murdered. Of the 500 vigilantes, only 7 were convicted, but their convictions were overturned, and only 1 served any jail time. In fact, some celebrated the violence. One man who, after the violence was done and he had blood on his hands and shirt, joined the festivities in a local bar and said, "Well, I'm satisfied now. I have killed 3 Chinamen." This shocking massacre reflected the fact that the Chinese were the scapegoats for the nation's economic problems. And it is sadly something we are seeing the echoes of today. Since the start of the coronavirus, pandemic misinformation and xenophobia have led to people blaming Asian Americans for the virus and the economic pain that followed. As a result, there have been over 9,000 anti-Asian hate crimes since last March, a year and a half ago alone. But unlike in 1871, we are not standing alone now. For a year and a half, we've been fighting anti-Asian hate in Washington, D.C., and I'm so proud that President Biden, in his first week in office, made it a priority to condemn the rising anti-Asian violence and look for solutions. And I will never forget standing behind him in the White House as he signed the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act into law to help improve our hate crimes tracking and response. Still, this anniversary is an important reminder about the power of xenophobia to inspire entire communities to ignore the humanity of their neighbors. Today's vigil is a reminder about the sacrifices that those 19 Chinese Americans made. But it's also a reminder that today we must use our voices to be vigilant about stereotyping, scapegoating, and unchecked bigotry. We must use our voice to ensure that our civil rights are protected. We must work with other fair-minded Americans to make sure that everybody, no matter what their backgrounds, are not bullied or tortured for being who they are. Today's vigil reminds us that we must never let this happen again.
Thank you, Judy, so much. And it's heartfelt and we're very moved. The reason that, okay, I'm going to start all over again. Y'all know, well, most of y'all know that I'm a teacher. And as I talk about the Chinese massacre to young people, they get angry. They actually get angry. They're angry because such a thing did happen in Los Angeles, but they're also angry because they said, why didn't I know about it? How was this covered up? Why didn't I study this in the histories? Why isn't anyone talking about it? And as we are now talking about it, I want to credit our mayor for his leadership and his vision, and looking at his design in his civic memory vision, because within it is the recognition that the massacre of 1871 happened, and it happened in his city. And so it's just incredibly good timing that the mayor is committed to doing what he wants to do and to right a wrong that he feels is a wrong. So I'd like to bring Mayor Garcetti up here now, and please welcome him.
Thanks so much. Here we go. Dr. Ewan Gay, let me start by thanking you and thanking all of the folks that have been commemorating and organizing around, not just in the tradition of the last 10 years, but of the last 150 years. When in this city, the year after this massacre, the Chinese community came to commemorate, and the year after that, and the year after that, I dare say probably the 50th anniversary, someplace here downtown, the community came together to keep this flame burning of memory, of history, for two reasons. One, because of the souls of those lost need to be remembered. And two, because we can't march forward if we don't face boldly the past, if we don't turn our faces to history to be able to move forward. Judy Chu, thank you. You're such an inspiration. You are not only a Los Angeles jewel, but a national jewel. And you remind us of why representation is so important. I think it's such a difficult time to live through, not only because of the most traumatic year of our lives, but as we unearth history, sometimes we see the tendrils of it cross each other. It was actually, I believe it was a Mexican man and a white man who first came out, Jesus Balderin, who was kind of a marshal at the time before there was police officers, to come out to check on that fight. There were justices of the peace, one justice of the peace who, on the outskirts of town, which was by then Broadway and 7th, that was way out of town, hid Chinese that were fleeing so that the numbers weren't more in the cellar of his vineyard. You see how each one of us can see good and bad around us always. How footsteps from here, Councilmember De Leon and I, 2 weeks ago on Indigenous Peoples Day, together with El Pueblo, gave this land back to the Gabriello Tongve people to say this is yours and we need to ask permission from you to use it first, not vice versa. And we read the history today because it informs our future tomorrow. It was when I was reading Eternity Street, an amazing book a few years ago that chronicles the history of violence in our city, that I realized the actual intersections where this horrific event occurred. And I realized that I go to work every single day a block from where a Chinese Angelino was hanged. And up one block further between the Hall of Justice and now where the parking structure is there for that building where there were stables, another person was hanged. And every time we get on the freeway right here, we're driving over where the building was, where people were pulled out of where they lived and worked and killed. And for me, I said, that cannot stand, that we somehow shelve away this history and put it on the pages of dusty volumes or specialist classrooms. This needs to be something that every Angelino and everybody visiting Los Angeles sees and knows and feels. And it wasn't a story by itself that we lift up this story tonight, because the story of the way we used to have slave labor of our native peoples here, giving them money on a Friday after we released them from jail labor so that they could get drunk and get arrested on Sunday, put back in jail and work off another week of their labor, was right here around us. Calle de Negro, which had a different meaning than just black back then, which is what we named the street where Angelinos of African descent lived. I hope that people of all backgrounds can embrace this piece of Chinese Angelino history as their own, place themselves in this, and see their work moving forward as well. I'm humbled by the work of our co-chairs, members of our steering committee, the staff and the board of the Chinese American Museum, and my colleagues who are here today, including the council member of this district, Kevin De Leon, Congresswoman, as I mentioned before, and of course our great state representatives, Ed Chow and Wendy Carrillo. We have so many reasons to feel pride in being Angelinos. I think for all of us, we seek to build a city not of diversity, not of inclusion, because that implies somebody has power and is including you, but of belonging. Because belonging begets ownership. A city that we all should own, just as a history we need to all face. I've been struck in the last year and a half by how fragile our community is, but also paradoxically how strong it is too. The way that people stepped up for strangers, knocking on the doors of their next door neighbor for the first time to see if they were fed during a pandemic. The way people took to the streets to march for justice last year, for racial justice. The way that people have donated their time and their courage. The way, yes, people have gotten vaccinated, because vaccines aren't mostly for yourself. They're an expression of your love for your neighbors and the people around you and protecting their lives. The way that voters have stepped up in the past years to say these tents shouldn't stand in a Los Angeles. The way that we've stood up to say that we need to be stronger and better and faster and bolder. But the cold-blooded murder of 19 Chinese Angelinos, one of the largest recorded mass killings in American history, if not the largest, is a vicious act of bigotry that we must raise up into our consciousness today. I know that a little over a year from now for sure, and maybe even a few months from now, I no longer will have the honor of being the 42nd mayor of this city. But I told Councilmember Mike Wu on the way here, count on me, long after I'm mayor, to raise money for this, to go and make the case, to build a history around Los Angeles. We are a city that does shove away its history, one of the few cities that doesn't have a museum to the city. A little seed to plant there for everybody too in the future. But we are a city that doesn't look at this lesson just in the past. It makes us, those of us who stood in Chinatown at the beginning of a pandemic, even before we closed down an economy, when people were starting to blame anybody they thought looked Chinese for this virus. The words that we saw coming out of the top leaders of our land that inspired people to take up weapons and to attack fellow Americans means that each one of us has a role, not just the mayors and the assembly members and the council members and the congresswomen, all of us, wherever we sit, wherever we work, to make sure that we squash bigotry wherever we see it. I want to thank by name the committee chairs, Dr. Yuan, Public Works Commissioner Jessica Calosa, former council member Mike Wu, Felicia Filer from our Department of Cultural Affairs, and David Louie. David Louie, I joke, mayors come and go, but David Louie's always there here. at El Pueblo, and I know we're going to hear from you too. But I want to share a few thoughts from the committee members that I've heard, actively listen back, make a commitment from the city, and then close with an apology. First, the location that the committee's preferred site is very close to where we're standing, adjacent to the Chinese American Museum on the 400 block of North Los Angeles Street. It's a visible, publicly owned stretch of sidewalk that's shaded by a bunch of mature Chinese elms, my favorite tree, and very near the site, but a place close enough that it's there where this occurred, but also a place where people can reflect. The committee's also recommended a design selection process that's open to architects and artists and designers from around the world, and responsive to input from our Chinese American community here, so that we face, as we always do, a global city with an intensely local ownership. And while the memorial will be the primary site for people to read about and to reflect upon the massacre, the idea is that we should also have other sites. And I want to thank Christopher Hawthorne and everybody who's been a part of reconceptualizing what memory means and how we can all own it. So it's not about mayors putting up statues that the city council approves and funds. It's about each one of us seeing something that travels the space that was contained by this event, not in just one place, but throughout these blocks. An audio walking tour to tell the story about how the violence played out. And before and after the dedication of the memorial, continuing the related programming, as we've seen so marvelously over the last few days. I encourage you to learn more about this, especially those who might be watching today live on our stream, at civicmemory.la. This is a project we invite you to own here and the other stories across Los Angeles that for too long have gone untold. Finally, because we need to say it, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for this city. I'm sorry for those who were official representatives of this city and the violence that they begat. I'm sorry for the unchecked violence that happened, that took the lives of 19 of our fellow Angelenos. I'm sorry for the injustice that revisited their families when the sentences that were brought against some of the perpetrators were overturned and no justice was ever served. We are sincerely sorry, but we know that saying sorry needs to come with actions and not just words. Think about the descendants that would have been here today. Think about the children that were not born because their fathers were killed. Think about that 12-year-old child and how he would have changed Los Angeles. And then we understand that hate, when it manifests in violence, steals something from all of us. It steals our potential, it steals our dreams, and it steals our history. We will never forget this 1871 massacre. We will build, finally, the memory that it deserves, and we will learn from it to make sure that the dreams that we have and that they have can in some way be realized by the actions we take. Thank you, and God bless the memory of those fallen.
Thank you, Mayor. It meant a lot today for you to say those words. Thank you. For those of you who aren't really familiar with the Chinese American Museum, we are right there. And we're a city museum. We're part of the El Pueblo Historical Monument, proudly so. And we're also part of Council District 14. And I want to bring up now Council Member Kevin De Leon to give us a few words of our relationship together in terms of his council district and the work that we do as a Chinese American museum. Council member?
Thank you so very much, Gay, for the introduction. Mr. Mayor, I want to thank you very much for your eloquence, for your elegance, for your deep, heartfelt, profound apology to the Chinese American community. It is something that resonates with each and every one of us. Congressman Judy Chu, as Mayor Eric Garcetti just mentioned a few moments ago, you are indeed a jewel not just of Los Angeles, but the entire nation. To our wonderful Assemblywoman who represents us and fights for us each and every day, who represents us up in our great state capital, Assemblywoman Wendy, muchas gracias por todo lo que has hecho para nosotros. To my good friend next door, Mr. Ed Chow, Ms. Yolande, I thank you very much for your incredible leadership as well, representing us in the state capitol. And I know my good friend Mike King was just here just a few moments ago. I want to also recognize Mike King, former Assembly member, one of my colleagues. Also, we have another former Assembly member here that's no other than our very own Warren Furutani, who is here too. I want to recognize Warren Furutani, and also to our council member, Mike Wu, the first Chinese American to ever hold elected office in the City Council of the great city of Los Angeles. We also have with us and also a very dynamic young leader who represents the largest community college district in the nation. That's no other than our very own Mike Fong. Mike Fong, thank you very much. And also we have our city council member from the east of us in the city of Monterey Park. With us, we have Peter Chan as well too. Council member, welcome very much. David Louie, thank you very much for your incredible leadership. And our executive director, our CEO of El Pueblo, Arturo Chavez. Thank you so very much for the incredible leadership that each and every one of you have displayed. Today, as we all know, we gather in solemn remembrance to acknowledge the worst atrocity in our city's history of 240 years. The savage, as well as horrific, massacre of 18 Angelinos at the very birthplace, right underneath our feet, El Pueblo, the birthplace of the great city of Los Angeles. No doubt, as we all know, this was a racially motivated massacre perpetuated by a white mob against innocent Chinese immigrants, plain and simple. At the time, Chinese immigrants were, quite frankly, relatively new to the city of Los Angeles. With a population of roughly 5,700, the population of Chinese Americans was a merely 10%, only 172 in total. And according to the late historian William Mason, the first Chinese immigrants to Los Angeles were Luce and Fu, who arrived in 1858, just 2 years prior to the founding of the Republic of the great state of California. Most arrived from Guangzhou, China, or the Canton region of China. They came to LA fleeing food shortages, famine, poverty in the countryside. And like most ethnic immigrants, they came here and working the most grueling jobs, mining, agriculture. And also, like most new ethnic immigrants, they were marginalized and forced to live in ghettos, apart from the established and growing Angelino population. In fact, many don't know that where we're standing today is actually the original Chinatown, as well as Union Station. Where Chinatown stands today is not the original Chinatown. One could say that forced relocation or forced gentrification, if you will, started back in the 1800s with our own Chinatown community. And by the late 1860s, the Los Angeles News and Los Angeles Star newspapers started publishing vicious editorials and commentary, articles already targeting Chinese immigrants, intentionally using negative stereotypes and disparaging depictions. These editorials and articles instilled and perpetuated fears that these new immigrants were taking jobs from other Angelinos. The sentiments that resemble almost exactly the current political rhetoric, hostile attitudes that we hear today of all of our immigrant communities. In fact, this hateful antagonism directed at Chinese immigrants back in 1871 was a powder keg building up. All it needed was a spark. And yes, they got that spark. As our Congresswoman Judy Chu just articulated so well just a few moments ago, that spark happened today, October 24th, 1871, in what was then known El Callejón de los Negros, the city's infamous Vice District along Aliso Street and Los Angeles. As we know very well, what took place But the event was a prelude of more discrimination, more hostile racism against Chinese Americans. In fact, the very legislative body that both Ed Chow, Warren Furutani, Mike Ying, and today Wendy Carrillo, and that I had the honor to represent in both the red as well as green carpet. That California state legislative body would in fact go on to enact discriminatory laws targeting Chinese immigrants in order to discourage further immigration from China to California. And they sought to severely limit the success of Chinese laborers already here. There were already 20,000 Chinese men working in the state of California, building the great transcontinental railroad that opened up the largest economy in the United States of America, the 5th largest economy on planet Earth today. These laws that were perpetuated on both the green and red carpet, the very carpet that both Assembly member Ed Chow, Wendy Carrillo, and myself, that we served on, these laws denied Chinese Americans in California the right to own land or property, the right to vote, the right to marry a white person. They denied children of Chinese descent access to our public schools and denied Chinese immigrants the right to bear arms. It sounds like a precursor to Proposition 187 back in 1994. Some of these laws authorized the removal of Chinese immigrants to outside town and city limits and denied Chinese laborers employment in public works projects. They even denied them the right to fish in our own waterways and unfairly taxed Chinese businesses and individuals who employ Chinese laborers. These laws, in fact, would inspire a congressman, a California congressman from up north, Placerville, just south of Lake Tahoe, or I should say somewhat west of Lake Tahoe. This, in fact, California congressman who was inspired and motivated by the California State Legislature took our law to Washington, D.C. That became, back in 1888, the Chinese Exclusion Act, born, inspired, and motivated in our very home state of California. We know that it unleashed decades of more discrimination and abuse against Chinese immigrants. And for me, this history is not just profoundly wrong, but it's personal, because it's also my roots originating from Guangzhou. That's why back in 2009, I wrote and passed, along with my former colleague Mike Ying and Paul Fong, the Assembly Concurrent Resolution number 42, which became the first apology in the history of the United States ever passed regarding the institutional discrimination and violence and atrocities committed against Chinese Americans and Chinese immigrants. It served as a model for other state legislative bodies and for the Congress, with Congresswoman Judy Chu and then Congressman Mike Honda from San Jose, who carried that measure at the federal level. In fact, the same racist attitudes and editorial attacks that sparked the Chinese American massacre of 1871 went unchecked and grew into centuries worth of racial abuse and discrimination. And as Mayor Eric Garcetti just articulated so eloquently well, it emerged in full force over the past 20 months. What Gay just mentioned a few moments ago, we all witnessed the surge of anti-Asian American hate because of the coronavirus. Following our former president's racist verbal attacks, we saw a clear spike in violent attacks against our senior citizens, against youth and families. These acts cannot be overlooked. And that's why on the 6th of October, along with the leadership of the City Council and our Mayor Eric Garcetti, we submitted a motion that commemorates October 24th, 1871. It commemorates the lives that were lost and the reason why they were lost. I'd like to say that we're here because of Ah Wing, Dr. Chi Long Tong, a physician, Chang Wan, Liang Hui, Ong Long, Wan Fu, Tong Wong, Ah Lu, Dei Ki, Ah Wa, Ho Hing, Lo He, Ah Won, Wing Chi, Wong Chin, Ah Kot, and Wa Xinhua. These are the human beings. These are the Chinese. These are the Chinese Americans. These are the Angelinos whose lives were taken away so ruthlessly, hung by the gallows. As was mentioned, the worst lynching in American history. These names today are lifted in honor of their bravery to stake a place of their lives here in Los Angeles and for their resilience in the face of bigotry. They were and will forever be Angelenos, founders who paved the way for millions of others to make California their home. And we remember their lives and the tragedy of their deaths as a reminder that bigotry and discrimination cannot be denied the humanity to each and every one of us. Mr. Mayor, I can't stress enough to you, this is, I believe, from the Chief Executive Officer of the second largest city in America, the first official apology that you articulated so eloquently, so passionately to the Chinese American community, to all of Los Angeles. And I want to join you. I want to echo you on behalf of the council member of CD14, also that apology to not just Chinese and Chinese Americans, but to all Angelenos for the horrific crime that was committed against Angelenos back in 1871. We stand strong together as Angelenos because of the rich mosaic, the beautiful tapestry of who we are, regardless of the hue of our skin and who we are and where we come from, who we love, which God we pray to, and yes, regardless of our legal status. We're all human beings that are deserving to be treated with dignity and respect. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Council Member. I talked about Congresswoman Judy Chu being here for every commemoration we've had at the Chinese American Museum. And Assemblymember Ed Chow also holds that title because no matter how busy it was, no matter what day of the week it fell on, and we understand that the Assembly member is a family man who really holds his family close to his heart, and yet he still would make time to come to the commemoration, no matter what day, what time it is, and we appreciate that very much. So, Assemblymember Chow, would you come up and say a few words to us?
Thank you very much, Gabe, for your introduction, and thank you for the invitation. And let me begin by expressing my appreciation and gratitude to our mayor for issuing the apology and echoed by Councilmember De Leon. It means a lot to me, and it means a lot to the community. So thank you very much. 150 years ago, Los Angeles' Old Chinatown witnessed one of the largest mass lynchings in history. Some say it was a case of the wrong person being at the wrong place and the wrong time, which ignited the incident. Regardless, the end result was 19 Chinese immigrants were tortured and hung by a mob, and one of them was as young as 12 years old. The incident didn't occur in a political vacuum, but during a time period of deep institutional racial bigotry. It was a period of growing anti-Chinese discrimination here in California that ultimately climaxed in the passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which placed the stringent restrictions on immigration in U.S. history, banning all immigration of Chinese laborers. It's also important for us to remember the underlying conditions that led to the 1871 massacre, especially in light of the present-day xenophobia that has skyrocketed during this COVID-19 pandemic. It's really saddening to read the recent report by the LA County Human Relations Commission, which states that anti-Asian incidents increased by 76%. Ladies and gentlemen, there's much work to be done. We must never forget that our nation is a melting pot that has continued to be rejuvenated by newcomers. It is our willingness and ability to embrace and harness our diversity that makes the United States such a great country. That is why in 2016, I authored and passed a law, AB 2864, to acknowledge and bring awareness to two key pieces of our history that capture the Chinese American experience. As we heard earlier, we all know that since their arrival, Chinese Americans have played a significant role and made substantial contributions in California and the United States, among others, as builders of the Transcontinental Railroad and other critical infrastructure, as we also heard earlier. The legislation also reminds all Californians of the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 as being one of the most discriminatory laws in the country that singled out and mentioned a specific ethnic group, the Chinese, from immigrating to and becoming naturalized citizens of the United States. AB 2864 also highlights these two major components of our history and brings into our state K-12 educational curriculum the opportunity to remedy gaps in the teaching of our history, and not to forget the systemic racism that took place in our state and our nation. It also emphasizes the important role that our diverse communities play in building America. It is absolutely crucial that we educate our students who represent our next generation of leaders, movers, and shakers, the history of the Chinese American experience. Earlier this year, I also authored and passed ACR 55, which commemorates October 24th, 2021, as the 150th anniversary of the Chinese Massacre of 1871. ACR 55 is important because the state of California is now on record to officially remember the Chinese Massacre of 1871. The resolution passed unanimously. I hope that taken together, the legislation and resolution, along with our community efforts to combat the rise in hate incidents, will make a much-needed difference. I want to thank the leadership of the Chinese American Museum for their work over the years, for preserving our past, our history, so that we can plan and learn from it and plan for the future. So tonight, we remember our fallen brothers and sisters and recommit ourselves to building a better future together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Assemblymember Chow. As we work these last few months, this last year, not only on the programming for the 150th anniversary of the Chinese Massacre, but also for looking at how we visualize and implement the mayor's 1871 monument and other projects. It took not only local, it took not only state, it took not only national visions, focus, but also our own Chinese American community and also our county offices. I was appointed one of the commissioners of the County Human Relations Commission. That was the first time I had the opportunity to work with the county agency. And so Supervisor Hilda Solis is unable to be with us tonight, but she definitely sends her support and her encouragement. And her deputy, our friend Huang Wen, is here. And Huang, would you say a few words on behalf of the supervisor?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Gay. Mr. Mayor, Assembly members, Council member, and Congresswoman. My name is Huang Wen. I'm here representing Supervisor Hilda Solis, who's chair of the Metro Board and also chair of the Board of Supervisors. And on her behalf, I want to thank the incredible work of our very own Dr. Gay Yuan, our commissioner, the Chinese American Museum, the steering committee members and co-chairs, all the volunteers and staff. Truth-telling is the first step towards healing and reconciliation. In order to truly move forward, we believe that we must be clear-eyed about the past. It isn't enough to learn American history through the eyes of the so-called victors. It is time we tell the stories that were not often heard. 150 years ago today, a community suffered an immeasurable loss. Among those who were killed was the Chinese community's only physician, which is to say that the consequences of that day were long-lasting. And the remnants of that racism still linger on today, which is why we're here, to begin the process of healing through education. We know that there is a lack of awareness about this massacre and the many instances of violence against Chinese Americans and other communities throughout our history. And it is so critical to tell these stories, not to bring up the pain of the past, but to ensure that we are clear-eyed about the future. That is why Supervisor Solis is proud to co-author the motion with Mayor Garcetti at the Metro Board to start this work with our partners. And we hope to continue to uplift the voices of those who have been historically marginalized, whose stories deserve to be told. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan. I've had the pleasure of working with many of you in the audience these last few months, and there's just amazing people that old friends, new friends, and hopefully they're lifelong friends, because we will be doing things together as we try to right these wrongs. Particularly, I want to shout out to a couple of people who I know our audience should be meeting. An old friend is Mike Ng, and Mike is a member of the California Unemployment Insurance Board. We have Arturo Chavez, our boss here at El Pueblo Historical Monument. Jessica Colonza, a new friend, amazing woman. She's LA Board of Public Works Commission. Gail Kennard, another new friend that I'm hoping to be working with for a long time, and she's LA Cultural Heritage Commission Vice President. Felicia Fire, yes. And the mayor introduced the co-chairs of his steering committee, but Felicia has been there with us every meeting, and she is the DCA director of Public Arts. Thank you so much. Christopher Hawthorne is our other boss. He is Chief Design Officer for LA, and much of the work he bore on his shoulders in terms of what we're doing for the 1871 monument for the city. And it's just been a pleasure working with you, Christopher. We met LA Metro Board people, and very, very happy to introduce Stephanie Wiggins, the CEO. Thank you so much for coming to join us. And did Steve Hyman come? Where is Steve? Oh, Steve. Okay, Metro Communications Director, welcome. And our old friend Mike Wu. He's been mentioned almost by every speaker, and so there's more good things in Mike's sleeve that we'll be working with on this project and also with CAM. I'd like to introduce our own Executive Director of the Chinese American Museum, Michael Trong. Two people who I will introduce now, but who will be speaking later. And that is Assemblymember Wendy, and she would have a lot to say to us later on. And then, of course, El Pueblo Commissioner, past President David Louis. So at this time, I would like to bring up Michael Trump. By the way, with all your compliments about our week of programming, it's all Mike. It's all his hefty, lifting with wonderful team of staff members.
Thank you, Gabe, for the introduction. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us in front of the museum and for those tuning online. I'm Michael Trung, and many of you heard my story that I began my career at the Chinese American Museum in 2005 as an intern. And I represent now, after 2 years, the executive director of the Chinese American Museum. Between then, thank you. Between then and now, I often give tours in the museum. And when someone asks, why is this story important? I simply answer, we must learn from the past so tragedies like the Chinese Massacre of 1871 do not get repeated again. With the start of the pandemic, this phrase has such a different meaning. We know that this massacre was not the start of violence against Chinese, but it was the combination of anti-Chinese hate that spread throughout America. The dangerous rhetoric of yesteryears, the Chinese must go, has transformed to what my generation often heard growing up, where are you really from? To now simply go back to China. So from history, we know that the dangerous language will lead to violence, and yet anti-Chinese rhetoric often used today is so prevalent that it gives license to be violent against our own community. So now I ask myself, and ask all of you, what have we really learned? Today completes the 8 days of programming for the Chinese American Museum to commemorate the 150th anniversary of the Chinese Massacre of 1871. I would like to thank the board, the staff, the panelists, and the artists who have come together to develop this week of programming. While some of them are watching us virtually, I'd like to acknowledge those who are sitting in the audience that have not already been recognized. Marcos Aguilar, Jason Chu, who is a moderator for one of our programs, Hao Hong, Tom Jacobson, who wrote their play, The Chinese Massacre Annotated, Stuart Koh and Pat Lee, here representing Cathay Bank and the generous grant that supports this program, Cameron Lee Wong, John Wong, Lee Wong, Jeff Liu, our very own Julie Poon, Marie Valles, Elaine Wu, Scott Sech, and Leland and Peggy Sun, the founders of the Sun Yat-sen Center Foundation. And we have from the CCBA, the Chinese Catholic Benevolent Association, Mei War Lau, Ernest Lee, and Angela Kai. And last, I'd like to introduce the Board of Trustees President, Los Angeles Community College District, Mike Fong. I would also like to acknowledge our staff, Rochelle Schumard, Ambrose Leon, Kevin Ecaselio, Maya Lee, and Ashley Lee. They are all exhausted, but is dedicated to making sure that we're able to do what we do. And I want to again thank everyone I listed earlier for taking the challenge, for trying to answer the question, what have we learned? Through a diverse series of programming that explore the history, the politics, and the social conditions that led to the violence and its impact on Los Angeles a century and a half later. Throughout the months of planning, I heard from many of you what I constantly hear being here at the Chinese American Museum, that when you talk about this tragedy to others, you have to stop and explain the history as it's never been told before. I stand here 17 years after the museum's opening, after completing this week of programming, and I realize what we have learned is not the right question to ask. What we should be asking ourselves, how can we, as a society, learn from this if we've never been taught this story? All of us stand here today in solidarity, knowing that it's our erasure of our history, the failure of our society to tell our story, which allows racism and violence to fester. The founders of the Chinese American Museum had the foresight to create a space to preserve Chinese American history and tells our story with the understanding that we need to tell our story accurately and with our own words. CAM is committed to ensuring that our community will continue to have a space that our history can not only be told, but is heard and not forgotten. But we need your support. CAM recognizes the achievements made by our ancestors, but also remember its dark times that they faced, the Chinese Exclusion Act or the Chinese Massacre of 1871, that these tragedies not only expose our grief and sorrow within our own history, but also signifies our strength and a perseverance as a community that can overcome. We must learn, we must acknowledge, and we must remember. We commemorate today the lives lost of the Chinese massacre because we believe that all stories should be known. If you're living in Los Angeles, living in California, or living in the United States, the museum tells your story. And know that the Chinese American Museum is committed to telling America's story. And tonight, we're telling our story. Thank you so much.
He's our great leader here. Now I would like to introduce you to another new friend that I met not too long ago. We were actually picking up trash in Chinatown in May when we had the Asian American Heritage Month. And we both had our masks on, and she didn't know me and I didn't recognize her, but we were having a lot of fun picking up trash, didn't we? And then as we got to talking, I realized she was my assembly member here at the Chinese American Museum. And so accessible, so friendly, so willing to listen, and so willing to listen with her heart. And as we talked about what our dreams are for the museum that are especially connected to the 150th anniversary of the Chinese massacre, we talked about how she can help. And she did help. So I'd like to introduce our assembly member, Wendy Gabriello, and she will tell you about a very special project that she's doing with us.
Good evening to all of you here today and to all of you watching online. I am most honored to be with you here this evening for multiple reasons. I grew up just down the other side of the bridge in Boyle Heights and City Terrace. My father has been working in Chinatown for decades. In fact, some of you may know him. His name is Fernando, and he is one of the supervisors that ensures that Chinatown stays beautiful and clean and green. He's part of the program that helps young people ensure that they stay out of trouble. And you may see them in Chinatown. Chinatown has been part of my family's history as immigrants to this nation, just by simply crossing a bridge. And we have always felt that it was home. And I share that with you because I believe that the immigrant experience, no matter where you come from, the city of Los Angeles is such a unique place. You can go anywhere in the world in the city of LA. And most importantly, it is its people that make it what it is and that make it thrive and that make it beautiful. And I'm honored to represent the Chinese American Museum, this community, in your California State Assembly. And I want to thank the Chinese American Museum for continuously uplifting community by highlighting the significant impact and achievements of extraordinary individuals. Your contributions led to the advancements of Chinese Americans in Southern California and Los Angeles and beyond. And what we have learned in the last 19 months of the COVID-19 pandemic has shed light not only on our history, but an escalation and a resurgence of xenophobia against our AAPI community. A few months ago, we had the opportunity to commemorate a vigil just a few blocks from here in Chinatown against AAPI hate. And I want to thank LA Public Works Commissioner Jessica Calosa for working with my office so diligently and closely, the first Filipina American elected, appointed to that commission, to ensure that yes, please give her a round of applause for that amazing appointment and for being a barrier of breaking history, and ensuring that the voices of AAPI community members and stakeholders were a part of that conversation, as they should be. We oftentimes have to listen more than speak. and I'm thankful for the partnerships. Today, we commemorate and memorialize the 150th anniversary of the Chinese Massacre of 1871. And we honor the lives lost, 18 beautiful souls, residents of the City of Angels. And we cannot move forward until we acknowledge the wrongs of our past. I want to take this moment to just share with you something that inspires me that some of you may have heard before, but I believe that it is the foundation of where we grow and how we move forward. In the very early years of the founding of this nation, one of the founding fathers, John Adams, went to France and was seeking money and funding for the Revolutionary War. And he wrote a letter to his wife. I often call it a love letter. And in this letter he writes, "My beloved, I wish that I had the time to explain to you the beauty of the gardens of Versailles, but I don't, because I must get back to work. And I must go study politics and war so that our sons have the liberty to study mathematics and philosophy, so that their children have a right to study art and music." And to that end, I believe that that is the founding of this nation. That no matter where you come from, what you look like, what language you speak, or what your legal status is, this nation belongs to all of us, not just a few. It is only together that we are able to move forward, and we can ensure that our future is brighter than our past. And I share that with you because as I stand here and as I listen to all the speakers before me, Mr. Mayor, Councilman, Congresswoman, and so many of you that are here tonight, we stand on hallowed grounds. It is easy to just simply drive by and not see, not recognize, not feel the history of this city. But to know, Mr. Mayor, as you pointed out, just a few blocks from here by City Hall, just a few blocks by the freeway, just a few blocks in that direction, there are lives that were lost. There was history that is untold. And that is an important space that we are in. And I'm grateful for partnerships with Assemblymember Ed Chow to know that your California State Legislature, the Assembly specifically, has worked towards creating the rights of those wrongs. This year, we passed AB 101, written by Assemblymember Jose Medina out of Riverside, which ensures that every high school student moving forward will be taught ethnic studies so that the history of Chinese Americans won't be excluded from this point forward. And that took years to get done. I have the privilege of serving as one of the chairs of a budget subcommittee in our state budget committees. And this year alone, thanks to the support and guidance of many of you, but Dr. Yuan specifically, I am proud to announce that we are putting $2 million of your state budget into the Unity Garden for the Chinese American Museum to commemorate this incredibly important and necessary monument for the City of Angels. I share all that to say with you that there is still much more work to be done. I'm honored to be able to represent you. I'm honored to be a daughter of this city, to have grown up here, to represent this community that means so much to me, and that ultimately it is only together that we are able to move this city forward. In a few days from now, on Olvera Street, we will be in, if I may take a moment, a personal privilege to share. In my culture, in the Latino indigenous community, we celebrate Day of the Dead, Dia de los Muertos, which is an important celebration in our culture because it is often said, I've heard by elders, that we can die twice. We die in our physical body, and we die when we are no longer remembered. And to that end, I ask that we bow our heads in the memory of the 18 fallen individuals. Ah Wing, Ah Kut, Johnny Burrow, Wah Sing Kwai, Leon Kwai, Ah Long, Dr. Chi Long Tong, Chan Wan, Wan Fu, Tong Wan, Ah Lu, Dae Ki, Ah Wan, Ho Hing, Lo Hei, Ah Wan, Wing Chi, and Wang Qing. May they never be forgotten, and may their memory always be a remembrance of the power of the city and how we could move forward. Thank you very much. You want to do the? And may I ask my colleague in the Assembly, Assemblymember Chow, please join me as we commemorate this important day with an Assembly resolution in commemoration of the 150th commemoration of the Chinese Massacre at this moment. We'll do one photo, and then I'll ask Mr. Mayor and Council Member to come up, or whoever you want to come up. Should we get in front of the? Yes, in front.
Thank you. And I don't want us to leave tonight without answering the question, why? Why are we doing this? Why are we sitting here in the cold shivering, right? Crying, tearing up. Why are we doing this when it happened 150 years ago? And I want somebody who started, actually he's the one who started the commemorations at the museum without knowing it. He did something that he felt was right, and he did it. So I want to bring Commissioner David Louis up to tell his story about why he did it. And then afterwards, because Assembly Member led us in prayer, we will then go and bow in commemoration of the victims. Assembly, Commissioner, I gave you a
Good evening. You know, every year, Gay extends the invitation to me to speak, and I've often wondered why, and I think I figured it out. I think she looks at the progress that has been made, and it begins with ignorance, and she's always highlighted my portion of being the ignorant person. But the ignorance leads to knowledge. And with knowledge comes hope for a better world, and then the responsibility to make it happen. So let me just share a little bit of ignorance on my part. I was invited to to work on the El Pueblo Commission 12 years ago. And when I came on the commission, I spoke to a fellow by the name of Al Suhu. Al was and still is a member of the board of the Chinese American Museum. And he asked me the question, he said, what does it feel like to be on the very site of the Chinese massacre? And I didn't realize that what was the Chinese massacre. I had no idea. And I'm fourth generation Chinese American, born and raised here. Went to Dorsey High School, Cal State LA. My parents had a business in Chinatown. We went to Chinese Congregational Church. We were members of Chinese American Citizens Alliance. And yet I knew nothing, absolutely nothing about the Chinese massacre. Ignorance. I went and researched, studied, learned a lot. I gained some knowledge. And with that knowledge came the hope for the future to make things better. That year, which is just about a dozen years ago, I grabbed my youngest son on October 24th and came out 7 o'clock in the morning and said a few words of respect, tried to apply some dignity, and paid our respects to those 18 souls. And it occurred to me that, you know, how we view our past will influence how we imagine our future, and that it was my responsibility to make sure that my sons understood what had occurred. So we did that, and the next year we had invited a small circle of friends and came out and had a ceremony here, and I still have the photograph of that group, and a lot of the folks that are here were there at the beginning. Sue Ellen and her husband, Mike Ng, William Estrada, Ridley Thomas, Al Suhu, Eugene Moy, George Yu. In Arturo, you'll know that we actually rang the El Pueblo bell, which we're not supposed to do, in memory of each one of those that had passed. But the other person that was there was Gay Ewan. And Gay is a teacher, but she's also a proud and knowledgeable Chinese woman. And she took the lead from that point on. And in subsequent years, we've had this memorial and commemoration. So I like to think that as we look back over the dozen years, and maybe even as we look back over the last 150 years, that the best, I don't know if revenge is the right word, atonement, correction, the offset for those that have passed. What would be the best result going forward? I think the best result is creating a better Los Angeles. And I think that looking at all of you, that we've been pretty successful. I think our ancestors were living the life that they'd ever had in their wildest dreams. So, thank you. There's a lot more work to be done, but thank you very much.
So I think we really should credit David. for starting the commemoration, and I hope that as the years go by, we will continue to remember those who died on October 24th. I'd like to bring up our first Vice President, Paula Madison, and she's going to be helping us move around and get us in place so that we can read the names and pay our respects.
Thank you, Gay. And I'm going to pause a moment, and I want to personally thank you, Mr. Mayor, for an apology that I think moved many of us who are of Chinese descent, recognizing that it was a long time coming that this city and the leader of this city acknowledged and apologized, so thank you very much. I'd now like to invite all of you to participate in the ceremony with the reading of the names that will take place behind me. Please stay seated as we take a few minutes to adjust, and we will then let you know when to stand up and walk over. This is the moment where you retrieve your candles, easy to turn on at the bottom. For the audience watching at home, please allow us a few minutes to position for the ceremony. Thank you very much. Hello. Friends, if you would please join us down here where we will begin the ceremony of the reading of the names. Please assemble behind the photographers, who I would kind of ask to down in front. Please come in and fill in around
I guess while you're getting yourselves into place, I would like to do a little explanation of the names. The names that we have written down are the names that were anglicized, and they were spelled out, and they were names that we were able to glean from English publications like in newspapers or in court documents in 1871. Unfortunately, we have nothing of the names that were written in Chinese characters. And for those of you even with a little bit of knowledge of Chinese know that when you spell out Ah Fong, A-H-F-O-N-G, Ah is an endearment. So my name is Yun Guai Ming. Yuan is my last name, and Guai Ming is my name. Well, depending on whether it's my teacher, my parents, or whoever calling me, they could call me Ayun, right? Which is what maybe my colleagues and my schoolmates would call me. Or my dad used to call me Guai, which is the middle one. Or my uncle calls me Ming, right? And so when you see Fong, you don't know who the guy is. His last name could be Fong, his middle name could be Fong, his given name could be Fong. And so if we don't see the characters, in essence, these 18 or 19 people actually died nameless. And in Chinese culture, to die without a name and to die without being sent home, either your spirits or your body or your bones being sent home to be buried with your ancestors, is one of the most horrible things that could happen to somebody. And so even more so, I sympathize and I mourn for these 18 and 19 people. The other question we get is, how come some of you say 18 and some of you say 19 and some of you say, right? In essence, we have 18 names. We have a 19th name that supposedly was somebody of the massacre, a victim of the massacre, who died 3 days later from his wounds. So that name didn't show up in a newspaper. But if that's the case, how many more names didn't show up? Because we don't know how many died after that. And so we commemorate 18 or 19 because of the other one. And so the wreath that we have, and thank you for all the wreath sponsors, but the main wreath that we have actually also follows a traditional Chinese custom, which is we talk to our spirits through the sky. And so for the people that we don't have names for, we still commemorate them, we honor them, we remember them. And so we always have a 19th wreath when we commemorate them. I'd like to introduce Eugene Moy. For those of us in the Chinatown community, Eugene needs no introduction, and he's one of the founders of the Chinese American Museum, and we always have him helping us as we read the names. Ready? So, Ah Wing, Ah Git, Johnny Burrell, Hua Xin Guai, Leung Guai, Ah Leung, Dr. Tong, Zheng Hua, Hua Fu, Tong Wan, Ah Lo, Dei Gei, Ah Wan, Ho Hing, Lo Hei, Wan Wing Ji Wang Qin. You want to lead the bows? Paula and I then will lead you in the bows. I'll count off each bow one by one, and you're facing the right way. We'll turn around and then we'll bow. Bow number one. Bow number two. Bow number three. Thank you. May the spirits be pleased with what they've heard and what they've seen tonight. I thank you all for paying respects to them. In Chinese custom, with sorrow, we try to equalize it with sweetness. So as you leave, you will be given a red envelope with a piece of candy inside. The red envelope says, wishing you luck and peace, and the candy inside is for you to eat and to sweeten the sorrow that you feel today. We invite all of you, because it's cold, to go inside to the Pico House. And again, we've furnished some other sweet nibbles for you to indulge in, also to lift your spirit. And there'll be hot water for hot tea too. So thank you all for joining us. We can't tell you how much this means to us. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Assemblymember Chow, Assemblymember Carrillo. Thank you from Supervisor Solis's office, Huang. And then thank you, everyone, and of course, our council member, Kevin. And please join us inside, and we can sweeten our sorrow. Thank you so much.